Hi TYB, here we are in week 2 of the book of James. Are you enjoying this book? Can you see how there may be a little bit of controversy around this book? As I said in the Pauline letters, Paul talks about we are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ alone. And then James comes in and sort of goes, yeah, you know what? We need to have action on that. Faith without deeds is dead. So some say, look, that's too contradictory. They can't both work, but they can work together because you are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. Your entry into heaven is by grace alone. But you know what? Because we are so grateful for that gift of grace, we have legs on that. We want to do good works. We are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ for good works. And that's what James is saying. You've got to have spiritual maturity. You can't stay in that grace level. I'm saved by grace. You've got to have spiritual maturity. So you're going to hear this language of James. He's teaching about don't be double-minded. Don't be slow to anger. He's talking about don't show favoritism. There's this real sense of leadership and spiritual maturity on this book. Now, Jerusalem Church, I explained a little bit in the snapshot last week, but James is the brother of Jesus. Amazing. And he gets saved at the resurrection when Jesus comes back and he takes over the church. Peter is running the church, as we know in Acts, and 3,000 get saved and they stay in Jerusalem. While everybody in Acts, it kind of loses focus and they kind of go towards Paul and see the development of Christianity. But just because Paul's out here doing all these incredible missionary journeys, there is a church in Jerusalem run by Peter initially, and then in Acts 10, Peter gets the commission to go out. The sheet comes down, you can read it in Acts 10, and he says, you know what, this is for not just the Jews, but the Gentiles. And this Jewish-style church in Jerusalem, where it all started, remains, and Peter goes out as an itinerant preacher, let's say. And then James stays in this church, and he's kind of the church headquarters. You'll see in Paul's writings that he takes offering for this church and he goes back to Jerusalem. But imagine that moment where you are the headquarters of the church, you are the senior pastor of this church, this is your brother's movement, let's say, this incredible gospel message of your brother, the Son of God. And he knows that he's no longer his brother, he is the Son of God and always has been. And James is feeling this weight of keeping this church going, the gospel message being preached. And while he's doing that, you can read it in Acts, he sends out his leaders, and one of his leaders is Stephen. And Stephen ends up getting martyred. And while James is watching his leader get martyred for Christ, while he's watching his leader die for Christ, he turns his eyes, and over on the Pharisees' side and with the Sadducees is this man, this young man, and they are laying their coats at the feet of this young man, and he looks at that young man, and that young man does not want his church to flourish. That young man has been sent to put all his parishioners and all his congregation in prison, and that's Saul. And then they hear later on that young man who's going out to his churches to put them in prison gets saved. And then that man comes back and says, I'm saved, can I preach in your church? And James at first, you can read it in the account of Acts, James at first goes, yeah, I'm not sure. let me see. Let me just live it out for a bit, just walk it through. So James is this strong, solid figure in the headquarters of the church in Jerusalem. In Galatians, it talks about Paul's relationship with Jerusalem. Galatians 21:10, it talks about how Paul honours the relationship he has with the Jerusalem church. You're going to hear this language. It's very a Jewish book because James is probably the most Jewish Christian in the New Testament, probably a big statement, but he's a Jewish Christian, so he likes the tradition. You're going to hear about the law, you're going to hear about these traditions. Some say in Acts 15 we know there's this pinnacle account of the Jerusalem Council where they decide what the people of God look like. Are they supposed to be Jewish in tradition, and how are the people of God? Is it the Holy Spirit that shows them that they're the people of God, or is it circumcision? And then Paul has this debate, and James is there, and James is working this out. Some say this was written before that Acts 15 account because it's very Jewish. It's like, you need to have this understanding of the Jewish festivals and all of that sort of stuff. When you open up to James 1, let's have a look at the audience. to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. What does that mean? He is teaching from Jerusalem out to his scattered parishioners, and these are Jewish Christians out and about. So you've got this sound of spiritual maturity. James is concerned that the world is getting into the church and they're changing things a little bit too much. So you've got this strength of language. Watch your tongue, he says. Keep an eye on what is guiding your life. He talks about selfish ambition. He talks about don't show arrogance. This is the father, the headquarters of the church, talking to his churches saying, live out your Christianity. If somebody came up to you and you could not speak a word, would they know that you're a Christian by your actions? Would they know, not slandering, being honest, full of integrity? James is a book of solid foundation of spiritual maturity. I love this book because sometimes in Christianity we can go, oh, we're okay, we're grace, it's all okay. But you know what? What we do in our actions shows and preaches Christ more than anything. Francis Assisi said, preach the gospel and, if necessary, use words. And that's what James is saying. Your life should reflect the gospel message of Jesus. You're going to love this book. Sit in this book. This is a leadership session to correct your behavior. It's for mature Christians so that we mature in the faith and our actions have legs so that the gospel message goes out. Have a great week in the book of James.